when we say sanctuary, it's a sanctuary from these systems of oppression that have historically kept us apart to maintain a power structure that disenfranchises the many.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Katie Blankenship, who you heard up top. She is a co-founder of Sanctuary of the South, which provides legal representation to people caught up in our hellish immigration system, and also seeks to create community spaces for marginalized people in several southern states. We talked about the challenges of trying to provide resources to immigrants under the current onslaught from the Trump administration, and the importance of reclaiming the word sanctuary from people who seem to see it as a bad thing. That's coming up in a bit. Also, in our arts and culture segment, we'll talk about a music festival this weekend that spans multiple genres and 2 states in the same city. But first, it's time for the news roundup. It seems like a good time to talk about guns in the South. Last week, conservative activist Charlie Kirk was murdered by a gunman while speaking at a college campus in Utah. As of the time we're recording this, the government has just announced it has taken a suspect into custody. No details of who he is or what his motives were have been released. Assuming a political motive behind the shooting, something we don't actually know at this moment, Kirk's death would not be the first political assassination in the United States this year. In June, Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband were shot and killed at their house in the middle of the night by a man posing as a police officer. The same man, apparently an anti-abortion zealot, also shot a Minnesota state senator and his wife, although they survived. The shooting of Charlie Kirk wasn't even the first high-profile shooting of the day last Wednesday. A few hours earlier, a student at a Colorado high school shot 2 other students, who both survived, fortunately, and then shot and killed himself. It was the 47th school shooting in the United States this year, which have cumulatively killed 19 people and injured 77 others. And while we tend to focus on the specifics of individual shootings and deaths, why they did it, who did they target, was it mental illness or glory-seeking or some extremist belief system, the bigger picture is that the United States has a lot of gun violence. This isn't news, of course, but it is always worth reminding ourselves what an outlier we are in this regard. According to data compiled by Everytown for Gun Safety, which advocates for greater regulation of firearms, the U.S. gun homicide rate is 26 times higher than the average for high-income countries. The rate of about 4.4 gun murders per 100,000 people is more than 4 times higher than in Chile, the next highest country on the list. It is 6.5 times higher than Canada, 11 times higher than France, and 89 times higher than in the United Kingdom. The U.S. also has by far the highest level of civilian gun ownership in the world, with estimates of about 120 guns per 100 people. We are the only country with more guns than residents. And in the country with the most guns, the South has one of the highest concentrations of them. Surveys in recent years have suggested that about 44% of American households have at least one firearm. All but 2 southern states have higher percentages, ranging from about 46% in Texas and North Carolina to 57% in Arkansas. The only 2 southern states at or below the national average are Virginia, which is right around 44%, and Florida with a relatively low 35%. Both are among the most urbanized states in the region, which typically correlates with lower gun ownership. The South also has some of the most gun-friendly laws in the country. Everytown, the gun safety organization, ranks states based on the strength of their firearms regulations. They look for things like mandatory background checks, licensing for concealed carry, and restrictions on military-style rifles, bump stocks, and high-capacity magazines. Most of the southern states rank toward the bottom. Only 3 are in the top half: Virginia at number 15, Florida at number 21, and North Carolina at 24. Tennessee, South Carolina, Texas, Louisiana, and Alabama rank between 29 and 34, Kentucky at 39, Georgia at 46, Arkansas at 48, and Mississippi at 49. One long-standing argument among advocates for easier access to firearms is that they promote safety, both for the people who carry or own them and for their broader communities. But the data shows essentially the opposite. According to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and this is data from 2023 before that agency was plunged into its current crisis, all but 2 southern states had rates of gun deaths above the national average. The average was about 14 deaths per 100,000 residents. The 2 southern states that were below that were the same 2 we have already mentioned as having the lowest gun ownership rates and strongest gun laws in the region, Florida and Virginia, who were at 13.7 and 13.8 respectively, just below the national average. The rest ranged from Texas at 14.9 to Louisiana at 28.3 and Mississippi at 29.4, the latter 2 more than double the national average. Despite those trends, many southern states over the past decade have moved aggressively to roll back gun safety measures. All but Virginia and North Carolina now allow permitless carry, which means no state license or training is required to carry a concealed weapon. One form of gun regulation that has gained traction nationwide in the last decade is what are called red flag laws, or extreme risk protection orders, under which a judge can temporarily restrict somebody's access to weapons if they are found to be a danger to themselves or others. These laws have been around since 1999. Connecticut was the first state to pass one. But they surged in popularity after the 2018 shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, in which a shooter killed 17 people. Florida itself passed a red flag law that year, as did several mid-Atlantic and northeastern states. Virginia's legislature voted down a similar law in 2019 after the Virginia Beach mass shooting that killed 12 people. But after Democrats took control of the legislature that fall, they passed the bill in 2020. But since then, no other southern states have joined the 21 states nationwide that now have red flag laws. They have been proposed but voted down in states including Kentucky, Louisiana, North Carolina, and Tennessee. The latter, despite the support of Republican Governor Bill Lee after the 2023 Covenant School shooting in Nashville. In fact, the next year, Tennessee's legislature passed an anti-red flag law, banning any cities or counties in the state from adopting their own local versions of the legislation. Texas likewise passed an anti-red flag law this year. And as is so often the case with laws in our southern states, our approach to gun safety is way out of line with what polls and surveys consistently show are the views of the people who live here. In Tennessee, for example, polls after the Covenant School shooting showed that 72% of adults supported some form of red flag law. In Texas, a 2022 poll showed that 66% of voters supported red flag laws. The same in Georgia, where 60% strongly supported red flag laws and another 22% somewhat supported them. Those numbers were similar in South Carolina, with 60% strongly supporting and 19% somewhat supporting. In Kentucky in 2024, a poll of only Republican voters found that 72% supported red flag laws. Despite those views, most of our state-level political leaders in the South seem to hold more or less the same perspective that Charlie Kirk himself expressed at a public event in 2023. And for now, we will just let him have the last word on it.
We should have an honest and clear reductionist view of gun violence, but we should not have a utopian one. You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational.
Okay, now we're to my interview with Katie Blankenship. She is a co-founder of Sanctuary of the South, a workers' collaborative with a mission of justice and liberation through communal love and support. It is a network serving the South, providing legal services, growing community sanctuary spaces, we'll talk about what they mean by that, and supporting grassroots projects with the goal of breaking down systems of oppression. The group rejects what it calls the nonprofit industrial complex and does not receive any federal, state, or large foundation funding. It provides sliding-scale legal services with a special focus on keeping immigrant communities safe from violence and preventing family separation caused by ICE enforcement, detention, and deportation. Blankenship is a single mom, lawyer, activist, and proud member of the queer community. She is originally from Nashville and currently calls Miami home. She has worked for large nonprofit organizations for many years, where she built deep relationships with social justice workers across the country and developed extensive experience as a legal advocate. She also gained an invaluable education in what she sees as the systemic failings of the conventional nonprofit model. She enjoys nourishing her chosen family with music, delicious home-cooked meals, and the joyful presence of her daughter, Ellis. And one of her fellow staffers at Sanctuary of the South is her own mother, Pat Blankenship, who is a retired attorney herself and helps manage the organization. Sanctuary of the South is working to create a new model of grassroots organizing and mutual support, and I was really interested to hear about their approach, their projects, and their plans. So, Seth, let's go to the tape.
So, Katie Blankenship, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start, if it's okay, by talking a little bit more about your own background. I know you grew up in Tennessee, and I gather your mom was an attorney here. But what was your upbringing, your education, and kind of what drew you to social justice awareness and work? When did that become a focus for you?
Well, I love that question. I never get a question like that. My mom was a practicing lawyer for many years. She actually, her and my dad met in law school, and came back to Nashville, to Middle Tennessee. I was born in Nashville, raised in Murfreesboro. And they, as they say, hung a shingle for years, had their own firm. But they were both really active in our legal aid society. And I remember for years, my dad was the president of our legal aid society. And I, as their oldest, couldn't wait to get to work as soon as possible. I wanted a job as soon as possible. So I started working in my parents' law firm, I think, when I was 13. And it was just always just part of who I am and sort of how I was brought up. And the legal aid side of things was always just it was very clear in how my dad's dad started. He was the first lawyer, went to night law school at the YMCA in Nashville after he had his 4 kids. He was a photographer. It was too poor to be a photographer with 4 kids, so he put himself through night law school. And he did the same thing in Nashville. He was always doing a strong pro bono practice in legal aid, and it was just I just came to understand that there is no legal practice that is not service. And so for years, I sort of pushed away this legal background and did a graduate program in New York that focused on nonprofit administration. And then I worked in that field for years, even before law. Then it was youth arts and music organizations, which was a blast. And then I went to law school, and law school felt very much like sort of coming home. Just from the way I grew up. And then I just knew that the public interest, the social justice piece had to be front and center of what I wanted to do. And so I went to Belmont College of Law, was a member of the charter class, started Belmont's Legal Aid Society. And one of the first clinics we created was an immigration clinic in Nashville for DACA, VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Act, and U visa applications, which is what people can get if they've been victim or witness of a crime. And then that sort of set my life. Without knowing it, that set my life. That was, 15 years ago or so. And so throughout my entire legal practice, there's been a strong stream of immigrants' rights, even when I was in private practice. And then I moved down to Miami several years ago and joined the ACLU of Florida as an immigrants' rights staff attorney, and then became their deputy legal director with a focus continued on immigrants' rights in Florida. And I went on to work for various other nonprofit organizations and started an office for an organization called PEN America in Florida. But as we've seen this crisis develop under the Trump administration, Trump 2.0, what's happening in immigration, it just, everything else sort of fell away. It just was very clear. It was just really, I felt very called to just laser focus on this. And from the nonprofit entities I've been a part of, a lot of times they don't work, but they certainly, and that's, that's a whole other discussion. We could do a master's class on the nonprofit industrial complex, but even if they were working perfectly, they can't be the only mechanism for upholding democracy. They can't be the only mechanism of making legal representation more available, more equitable, to make our justice system more equitable, right? They have failed at that. If they are our only backstop, we are here where we are today. And so it just has been very evident to me for several years that there has to be a different sort of model. And then I met my co-founder, Mitch Gonzalez, when we were working for an immigrants' rights organization together. And that was kismet. We felt the same way about that and had complementary but varied experience. And so we just dove into Sanctuary of the South, of really just answering the call of the demand of the cases and sort of figuring it out as we went. It's been very much building the ship as we sail it. What is a low bono rate that people can pay and we can survive on? That's very hard to figure out. But not only that, having to be malleable, like in this environment, and how to even figure out how to be effective counsel. We started this crisis focusing a lot on bond, because we could get people out on bond, and it changed the entire game. So if they got out on bond, they didn't have to go back into court for at least a year, sometimes 2 or 3 years, sometimes getting them through the administration, which is a huge deal. Well, then they start closing the doors to bond, right? So now parole is non-existent. Bond is hardly existent. So you go, well, hell, what do we do then? All right, we got to look at a robust habeas practice. People need habeas petitions over and over. And then you see the extreme human rights abuses that are happening, and you pivot to, all right, we got to file claims to protect constitutional rights and pursue the damages for these gross human rights abuses that are happening. So it's just a constant pivot and move. But anyways, that's a long-winded answer to a background question.
Yeah, no, that's great. And listeners to the podcast might remember Mitch Gonzalez because he was featured, and we did an episode in Louisiana
yes,
this month, and went down to some of the demonstrations there. And Mitch spoke very eloquently, and particularly about his friend and
yes,
coworker.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you're in Miami, Mitch is in New Orleans. How do you focus when you talk about providing representation, legal services to immigrant communities, like that's obviously just an it was an overwhelming need before January. I don't even know what the word beyond overwhelming is now. How do you define what you're doing, what you're able to offer, and who you are able to serve? Because obviously the needs are manifold.
Yeah, it really is a constant pivot and reevaluation. First, as much as we have set ourselves apart as a distinct sort of entity from the typical nonprofit, we are not by any means rejecting the benefit we get from these organizations and the collaboration that happens within these organizations. And so we are in coalition spaces constantly with our nonprofit colleagues, our private bar colleagues, our community organizing colleagues, which is really critical. And we're in various spaces about specific issues such as the Everglades internment camps, such as what was happening and has been happening at Chrome since the beginning of the administration, and then more generally, conditions overall in the South and detention. And so we work very collaboratively in these spaces to look at, one, where is the need evolving? Like just as that example from, all right, well, the bond and parole doors are closing, so how do we pivot to looking at where we can assist in strategic litigation and really, trying our best to create, multi-tiered strategy and collaboration in that. So, an example of that is how we're looking at our Federal Tort Claims Act cases. All right, so we're doing a lot of Federal Tort Claims Act cases right now because, one, there's so much abuse happening and it has to be dealt with. And there are just very limited mechanisms of which you can assert any of these rights. Prior to Trump 2.0, you at least had the facade of federal oversight. There was the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. There was the ombudsman's office who you could reach out to. Those are dismantled. Those don't even exist. So literally you're just left with the court. So we're constantly, reevaluating and evolving our strategy. Federal Tort Claims Act, though, is very interesting because, again, when you think about it, not only is how do we fight zealously for the clients that we actually represent, but also do so strategically and in collaboration. And a great example of that is what's happened with the disappearances to Sikot in El Salvador, right? We've worked in coalition on that issue with the ACLU, with national legal organizations, with, a multitude of organizations and entities in regards to what was happening to these disappearances. That has evolved into us having specific clients who have reached out to us based on our contacts and family contacts where we'll pursue Federal Tort Claims Act relief on them. But we're also doing it in collaboration with other entities who are looking at how we can bring these claims to make sure these rights are asserted. And they are there as a backstop, hopefully, a record, a case law that pushes back on this should the administration, as we expect they will, continue in these sort of unlawful efforts. As far as individual cases go in our evaluation, we have two streams of work that is mostly immigration direct services. That's for detained, non-detained individuals. And that's growing into a lot of safety planning. We're doing a lot of not only getting together with individuals and families, but community groups, right? Like, how does your neighborhood become a community with a safety plan? If there's an ICE raid, who is calling? What's the phone tree? Like, who is disseminating information of legal resources should they need it? Where are we identifying safe places to be to, meet should we need to? All of these things are where we are today and what's happening. And so we're taking, safety planning has always been a part of immigration, but we're taking from, let's get powers of attorneys together and make sure you have all of the vital information you have in your point of contact on the outside to a whole other level of need based on, really this monstrous enforcement and crisis that we're seeing from the Trump admin. So the short answer is it's just ever changing, and that's just what's required.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to talk about the name a little bit, Sanctuary of the South, because obviously that word sanctuary, which seems like it should be an uncontroversial concept, has become really vilified, especially on the right. The way they talk about sanctuary cities as a bad thing. What does sanctuary represent to you? And I guess what was the intentionality behind using that word, saying this is what we want to establish?
I mean, one, as you described, right? Taking back that word as a good thing, is a beautiful thing. Sanctuary city is a beautiful thing. It's sanctuary space is a beautiful thing. And so we're certainly not shying away from that and want to reclaim that. But it's also, when we say sanctuary, it's a sanctuary from these systems of oppression that have historically kept us apart to maintain a power structure that disenfranchises the many, right? We talk about our model as a different sort of entity, both internally and externally. Like we had a conversation recently where we were welcoming two new employees on. I said, we want to talk about what we mean as a sanctuary for our employees, right? We want to talk about what it means because it is a sanctuary for us. And that's how we see it, as for the nonprofit workers, the people who want to do public service and have been thwarted, who have felt less than, who have been, had told to be quiet, or, we want it to be a sanctuary for them. And as our staff comes in, and I gave this example of when I was in law firm world, they would always talk about your work-life balance. We do care so much about your work-life balance. And work-life balance is critical. It was BS. They say it is BS, and then they don't care at all about it. But it always bothered me in this sense, and we have started Sanctuary of the South in this way of like, there is no work-life balance. There is life balance. This is life. Our work is part of our life. It has to be something where we're able to thrive, that doesn't suck us dry, that we can stop when we need to stop, where our families are integrated and our family time is cherished, and the time we should be finding ways to do this, that we're just not constantly wearing people down. And that's what this work has done for so long. So internally, we want it to be a sanctuary from that, of literally having a space to be creative in the work, to be proactive and dogged in the work, but to know that, you're cared for in your workspace, which is so rare these days. And shockingly, in the nonprofit world, that's very common. And sanctuary for our clients and our community in trying to really, preach or walk what we're, there's a phrase I'm looking for that I'm losing, but really practice what we preach and what movement lawyering really means. That there's a humbling and recognition of the community and the community organizing that needs to happen, and to follow and center that lead, and to look at the ways that we can, for so long, this, the power structure that has failed us so wholly, so completely, is really based on separating us, from othering us. And you see that in this immigration crisis. I mean, just in the name Alligator Alcatraz in the Everglades, just in the way Kristi Noem says, it's the scumbags of the earth. Those are violent words that do violence, that create violence. And that's the history that we have. And so we try very consciously, where we can, to base all of our work in a community, in just a community centered way of bringing in, centering the power and joy that is in community, and building our work from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and obviously, it seems like the primary focus is on the legal services, but you are also working on creating sanctuary community spaces. I think maybe working on one in Tennessee and one in Louisiana. What's the concept? What do you want to build?
So they're different at each one. So basically, we have the full dream of SOS has been basically like a 3-tiered tree. One is our legal services, that really should be it is the center and heart of what we are. And I think that's who we are. But the other two are deeply integrated in where we want to go, and how we see SOS as an entity. And one of those is already in progress, and that is our creating deep connections and supportive community organizations. So we do a lot of that in Louisiana with an organization that Mitch started with Adeli called SNAP. We work with a couple other smaller organizations in Louisiana, and then we've started other partnerships with nonprofits that are frankly coming up all around the country, supporting immigrant communities. And we look at ways we create, we provide legal services, and they, we support each other in organizing. We really look at where we can be, sort of officially integrated. So that is our sort of second tier that is happening and fully active. And our third is actually these sanctuary spaces. And the two that we are currently working on one is based on Adeli's vision completely in Louisiana. And you've already done a show about Adeli, so I think your listeners know that she remains in a carceral system. She remains in this detention center. But her initial vision for a space in Louisiana was based mostly on animal therapy, which is one of her greatest passions. And so Mitch has taken over bringing that to fruition with a partnership of other smaller orgs in Louisiana, creating a place where people can literally just come together. There can be an animal sanctuary for animals in need, many of those. Adeli had basically started it when she left. I think she had 15 animals that she had saved and was in various states under care when people would come over and visit and sort of thing. So she believed in that and wanted to build something from there. In Tennessee, we're actually working on a place that would hopefully be almost like a retreat space, where people could come there. It is in Sparta, Tennessee, which is on the beautiful mountains between Middle and East Tennessee on the Caney Fork River, and it's family land for my family, for my dad. And we're building out yurts and tiny homes and hoping it can literally be a place where people can come and be in sanctuary and community together, with a community garden, again, animal and hopefully music therapy sort of things. And that we could have spaces where, we could have retreats of, the coalition, the organizations, the communities that all circulate around SOS and allow other people to use as well. So yurts, we have our first tiny home built. We're working on yurts.
That's not too far from where the Highlander Center originally started, right? So there's a tradition there.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. So I guess kind of looking forward, I mean, I know, as you say, you're having to kind of adjust every week, sure, maybe every day, to sort of new outrages. Sure. But what are your major, I mean, obviously you're doing the day-to-day work. What are your major projects and initiatives for the next 6 months, for the next year? What are the things you're trying to do in the near term? And then the other thing I wanted to ask you was, because you're taking this kind of deliberately different approach from the conventional nonprofit approach, how are you funding this? Where are the resources coming from?
That's a great question. Let's talk about
that. That's a challenge for anybody, and especially it sounds like you're sort of consciously not doing some of the things that a lot of nonprofits do.
Yes, that is an excellent question. Let's talk about the 6 months sort of plans and goals. There are rather, several federal cases that we have either filed or are about to commence, that are going to be a big focus for SOS for the next 6 months and longer. One of those is the case of Maxim Cherniak, who had an untimely death at Chrome that we believe, if it were not for his immigration detention, he would certainly be alive today. Maxim's case is one of the cases that will fall under the Federal Tort Claims Act, as I was mentioning earlier. And we are initiating that case actually today. I'm sending what's called it's called an SF-95. It's the administrative complaint on a federal tort claims that starts the process. That's being submitted as soon as I'm done chatting with you today. That's what's next on my to-do list. We are also already engaged in several federal cases that will take a lot of our focus for the next 6 months and have focused on abuses inside detention centers. So one of those is on behalf of a young man named Guillermo Starabi. And Guillermo was at Baker for a long period of time at the Baker County Detention Center in McClenny, Florida. He was abused there after he was praying to himself at night and told to shut up. He was beaten severely, so much that he lost hearing in one of his ears. And his retribution for them beating him, they threw him in solitary confinement for over 90 days. I'm sorry, I think it was 80 days, over 80 days. We filed this complaint on his behalf based on the extreme abuse he has suffered at Baker. This is the second case I've had against the Baker County Detention Center for just their complete inability to responsibly house human beings. And so this will be a big focus of ours to help Guillermo hopefully get retribution and some sort of justice for his case. And then we're plaintiffs in an organization against the Everglades concentration camp. That is what our coalition has determined this is and what we call it, the Everglades concentration camp, otherwise known and I think very cruelly dubbed Alligator Alcatraz. We filed as an organizational plaintiff in this case, along with the ACLU National Prison Project and other immigrants' rights organizations. And we continue to be very active in coalitions to try to shut this space down, and we still represent clients inside. We will continue always with a very strong focus and be on the front lines in these detention centers. SOS is active in detention centers in Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Arizona, and Colorado, I want to say right now. We are all, yes, we're based out of Miami, Tennessee, and New Orleans, but we very specifically said sanctuary of the South. We mean the Southeast as a big focus. Mitch and I are Southerners. We are feel deeply called to justice and liberation in the South, but we also mean the global South. And so where our work is called, we go. And frankly, our clients can get sent absolutely anywhere overnight and disappear. So if they get transferred overnight and wind up in somewhere in California, then guess what? We're practicing in California, and that's just what we have to do. But our focus from the beginning of the admin, and it will be throughout and through the life of SOS, to be a witness, to report out, to push back, to fight alongside the people fighting inside of these detention centers all across the U.S., and we'll never stop that until the goal of abolition is reached. That's always going to be a huge focus.
And so on the
money
and fundraising side, how is that working?
Let's talk about the money. It's tough, but we're surviving. I mean, we are doing this. So and I'm so proud of this fact of SOS, and I think all of my nonprofit brothers and sisters out there will understand how big a deal this is. But we have grown from the beginning of January until today to when I send a message out to all our SOS team, there's about 20 people there. At least 50% of that is a volunteer staff. And that's volunteer lawyers, volunteer paralegals, volunteer therapists. Like, it is professionals coming to us and being like, how do I help? We're like, well, we don't have money to pay the staff that we need. And they're there. And that has completely changed the game for us. I mean, I have been able to initiate this federal litigation because I have two expert, incredible volunteer lawyers, a legal student fellow, and a volunteer paralegal helping out. It's like I couldn't do it without it. And to have that sort of volunteer commitment, and that they are showing up and understanding what we're doing, and I'm still not at a place, Mitch and I are still at a place where we can pay these people, it is so humbling. It breaks my heart. It warms my heart. It's beautiful. It's how we've survived in so many ways. The other way is, we really do exist probably at least 80% right now on earned income. We work on a low bono model. We allow pay scales. We allow payment plans. And we've been stitching it together, but it's a hustle. No question. It's for sure. It's difficult. And then we've started to see and receive benefit from the change that's happening. It's not just Mitch and I and the people that believe in SOS and have joined us that understand there's a need for different sort of models. The funding world sees that too. Nonprofits have literally, it's not hyperbole. Like, literally, every organization that we're in coalition with has received the letter from the admin that's like, you're under investigation for your immigrants' rights work. Like, it's very real. And when we're in calls, it's like, well, they can't do press. They can't represent these sort of clients. They can't do this. And so there's a growing understanding that there has to be a change in how we think about funding the work that we need to happen. And yeah, maybe you don't get the tax write-off, but that's where we are. And we are certainly not alone in that. So we have seen a growing, small but growing and steady bit of donations, both from individuals. When we have done specific work and shared out with the community about what was happening, like through our report with Human Rights Watch, we got a real outpouring of support that day in the community. The American community from across the country realizing this work is important. You saw them giving, and there's a growing number of donors that I think typically would have been limited to the 501c3 space that aren't. And so we're working very closely, and I think that's what it takes too. It's not, this idea of community is not something we toss around. We say it a ton, but we do not toss it around lightly. It's like we have to figure out how to create systems within this work that the whole thing is about binding us together and bringing us together. So if we're taking these, again, I go back to like some of our case examples, like the federal tort claims example, we're bringing these cases. That's great. Strong, cool. Could have a great case, could do a lot of good for the, folks involved. But what if you're doing it in partnership and in coalition with other organizations who are bringing cases, of other people who can do the community organizing to uplift the cases in the community, to inform the public, to get it out to the legislative bodies, to make them care about this, and then look at what's happening and we're rolling. We have to do that same sort of integrated advocacy with funders throughout the country as well. We have to do the same thing. You got to come in. You can't just be on the sidelines and sitting there. We need you in. We need to know what's happening. We need to share with you the truth of what's happening so you can share it with your people. We need to be active in this together, of understanding that funds need to get into this work. And so it's the same thing as figuring out, the answer to how do you figure out how to, pick cases or know what to focus on. It's the same thing as how do you figure out how to fund this? We've got to get malleable and think about this differently. Now that like bond and parole are basically over, one of the things I was working on today is we need some sort of fund that organizations and entities that are willing to take these sort of cases out of the gate, because you take a risk with a 1983 case, which is a constitutional claim. You take a risk with an FTCA, which are tort claims. You take a risk on habeas case. None of this may pan out, and you're doing a lot up front. We need a fund that organizations and entities who are willing to do this say, okay, cool. And you get, $5,000 for your upfront travel and, filing costs. Nothing. But it would make a world of difference in the ability of entities like us being able to take these cases. And it makes a huge difference, if you see, just look at what's happening with the Everglades concentration camp right now. That center is, at a point based on the advocacy against it, that it is no longer functioning. They can't do any construction. They've been stopped by a court to do construction. They're moving people out at record paces. Thank God they're getting them the hell out of there. They're under immense pressure based on just the stupidity and cruelness of how they opened the place. And if you go after something again in this integrated, determined way, it makes a difference. And so we need our donors to have that exact same mindset. Like, let's go, let's think about this differently. Let's jump in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Obviously, if people want to get involved, want to contribute, get more information, they can get all of that on your website, which
you can find it all on the website. You can volunteer with us, but more than that, get what we have started with SOS is a membership like NPR. Join us like you join NPR, put it on $30 or $50 you don't think about it, but you are also asked to and invited to come into our community. With that, you're going to be invited to town hall discussions to understand what's happening, newsletters about what's happening, information. And we want to have a real relationship with people who want to be part of this work. So come on in.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks so much for your work.
Thank you, Jesse.
For taking the time to talk about it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun. I appreciate you.
The Bristol Rhythm and Roots reunion is this weekend. It's a 3-day music festival in Bristol, Tennessee, and Bristol, Virginia. As anyone who's been there can tell you, the state line runs through the middle of downtown Bristol, along the aptly named State Street. The two Bristols have their own governments and are served by their respective states, but they function together smoothly enough that a visitor would never know it wasn't all one city. Combined, they have about 45,000 residents, which is less than 1/3 the capacity of Bristol Motor Speedway, the enormous NASCAR racetrack just outside of town on the Tennessee side. The Speedway has defined Bristol for generations, but in recent decades the city has embraced a second identity as well, as the birthplace of country music. That claim is grounded in the events of 1927, when a traveling record producer named Ralph Peer set up shop and recorded a bunch of local and regional talents. Among the songs that emerged were the first records by Jimmie Rodgers and the Carter Family. The Bristol Sessions, as they have come to be called, are widely credited as a crucial step in the creation of commercial country music. The city celebrates that heritage every year with the Rhythm and Roots Reunion, which brings together bands, artists, and fans for shows on outdoor stages spread throughout downtown Bristol. The festival started in 2001 as recognition of Bristol's crucial cultural role was growing. In 2014, a new permanent home for the Birthplace of Country Music Museum opened downtown. The acts at the festival cover a range, but mostly on the rootsy side of things. Over the years, there's been country, both classic and contemporary, bluegrass, blues, and rock. This year's headliners are the Teskey Brothers, Shane Smith and the Saints, Carly Pierce, and Ricky Skaggs and Kentucky Thunder, with a support program of dozens of other artists. Tickets are $169.99 for a weekend pass. The weather looks great this weekend, so if you're in the area, you can get back to your roots and have a good time doing it. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. I also want to mention we have a couple of new features on the website. Cartoonist Rick Baldwin is providing us with regular political cartoons, and we are actually going to have our first piece by an outside contributor this week talking about labor organizing in Virginia, so make sure you check the website for that. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Production. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call us and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me directly at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. We'll talk to you soon.